You ever stop and think about what's actually happening in that split second between deciding to do something and, well, doing it? I mean, we make thousands of choices every single day, right? But behind every one of them, there's this hidden mental architecture at play. Today, we're going to unpack a really cool theory from philosopher and biologist Wayne Wu that pulls back the curtain on these invisible movements of the mind that make every single one of your actions possible. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle a huge puzzle, the problem of choice. Then we'll see how our minds are actually built to solve it. We're going to completely redefine what you think attention is, explore the two very different sides of bias, and finally get into how we can actually train our own minds to work better.
All right, so let's jump right in at the very beginning. We're talking about a challenge that is so fundamental, our brains are solving it literally every single moment we're awake.
I mean, really think about it. Right this second, you could look up from the screen, you could look down, you could scratch your ear, you could start thinking about what's for dinner. There are just countless things you could be doing. So how is it that you end up doing just one of them? Why aren't we just totally frozen by all the possibilities?
This is what philosophers call the selection problem. And what's so fascinating is that it's not about having too much information. The classic example is the story about Buridan's ass, a donkey standing exactly halfway between two identical bales of hay. It has perfect information, but there's absolutely no reason to pick one over the other. And so, without some way to just break that tie, the poor thing starves. That's the selection problem right there.
So, if a perfectly rational donkey would starve to death, how do we manage to, eat breakfast and get through the day? Well, it turns out there's a hidden structure to how we act. And this is where Wayne Wu's model really starts to shine.
Okay, so we can start with a super basic model, right? A stimulus comes in from the world, and our mind produces a response. You see a ball flying at your head, you duck. Easy enough. But wait, you could also try to catch it, or maybe bat it away. So what is it that decides which response you're going to make?
Well, the missing piece, according to Wu, is this third thing, intention. Your intention, let's say your goal is to play catch, that's what breaks the tie. It acts like a guide connecting the stimulus of the flying ball to the very specific response of catching it, and it just filters everything else out. This is the first big key to solving that selection problem.
And then Wu takes this idea a step further. He says intention is just one example of something bigger, something more fundamental that he calls bias. Now, in this model, a bias is simply the thumb on the scale that pushes one path from stimulus to response over all the others. Without some kind of bias, we'd be stuck, just like that donkey. Action itself literally requires bias.
Okay, so if bias is this core mechanism that's guiding all of our actions, what does that mean for something we talk about all the time, like attention? Well, get ready, because this is where the theory gets kind of radical and basically turns our common understanding completely on its head.
For more than a century, our whole idea of attention has come from the psychologist William James. We tend to think of it like a mental spotlight, right? We point it at things, we pay attention to one thing, and in doing so, we kind of grab onto it while ignoring everything else.
But Wu's theory suggests something totally different. He says attention isn't a spotlight we control. Attention is the control. It's the actual process of our intention, our bias, guiding and tuning our perception to the specific things in the world we need to see in order to act. It's not the tool, it's the guidance system itself.
And check this out. This is perfectly illustrated by a classic eye-tracking study. So people were shown the same painting, but they were given different jobs to do. And just look at what happened to their gaze. When their task was to remember what clothes people were wearing, their eyes automatically scanned the people. When the task was to guess how rich the family was, boom, their gaze shifts to the furniture, the paintings, the objects. Their intention literally changed what they saw. That, right there, is attention as mental guidance in action.
So if bias is this fundamental tool that guides our attention and our actions, we have to ask a really important question. Are all biases created equal? And this is where the theory becomes incredibly relevant to our daily lives, because the exact same mental mechanism can lead to both incredible expertise and, well, real harm.
So here's the crucial takeaway. We need to kind of rewire how we think about the word bias. It's not automatically a bad thing. In fact, it's necessary for us to do anything at all. The real question isn't how do we get rid of bias, which is impossible, but how do we cultivate good biases and work on the harmful ones?
Let's look at two sides of the same coin.
On one hand, you've got a virtuous bias, the expert radiologist. Years of training have built this automatic attentional bias, so her gaze is just instantly, unconsciously pulled to a tiny, life-threatening spot on an X-ray that a newbie would completely miss. On the other hand, a harmful bias, a person in a conversation whose gaze is automatically guided away from someone in the group, basically shutting them out without even a single conscious thought. It's the same mechanism, but with totally opposite results. And to make this even more concrete, think about where you look when you're talking. Your gaze is a resource. Wu points to a scenario that's frankly all too common. In a mixed gender group, a male speaker's eyes might automatically drift towards the other men. His attention is being distributed in a biased way, which means he's effectively ignoring the women in the room, even if he consciously believes in equality.
And this brings this whole theory right into our own lives, doesn't it? Just take a second and think. Have you ever been in a meeting, or a classroom, or even just at a party, and noticed this automatic, unequal way that attention gets handed out? I'll bet once you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere.
So, if these biases are running on autopilot, shaping what we see and do without us even realizing it, are we just stuck with them? Well, thankfully, the answer is no. And that brings us to the final, and I think the most empowering part of this whole idea, how to actually train your mind. The message here is huge. The goal isn't to become some kind of blank slate, completely free of bias. I mean, that would mean you couldn't do anything. The real goal is to become a craftsman of your own mind, to consciously decide which automatic habits you want to change, and then transform them through practice. And there's actually a clear path for doing this. First, you have to identify a bias you want to change, like who you tend to make eye contact with in a meeting. Second, you set a new, conscious intention. You tell yourself, okay, I am going to make a point to look at everyone in the room. And third, you practice. You do it deliberately, over and over, until that difficult, conscious choice becomes your new, virtuous automatic response.
But let's be real. This is not easy. This is hard work. And Wu is really clear about this. Changing these deep-seated habits takes the same kind of dedication as learning to play the violin. You can't just go to a one-hour seminar and be fixed. It takes serious, long-term habituation. I mean, we don't want a doctor who just intends to do her best. We want a doctor whose skill is so deeply ingrained that her attention automatically finds what's wrong. And the very same thing is true for building a more fair and just world.
And so that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? This theory gives us a map of our own minds and a kind of instruction manual for how they can be reshaped. But the actual work, the practice, the habit building, the training of our own automatic responses, well, that's on us. So how do we best train our automatic selves?